They call us the 1%. Our nation's line of defense. But we are no different than you. We are trained professionals. We get the job done and protect our nation. We are your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and Guardians. We are your defense.
Those are the folks that we are here each week to pay our tribute to. We want to thank you very much so for your dedication in doing so. We do have by the way, we have a little bit of a audio issue this week. That will be rectified by next week, so bear with us if you will. We do have a few guests that I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you. Jen Snyder, raise your hand over here, will you? Jen, would you stand up for just one moment? Jen, by the way, is a guest of Nancy Fossbender, and she is a full-time resident here in Arizona. She's also a United States Army veteran, and she served in the years 1978 through 1981. She was a 5-ton truck driver and then a supply sergeant. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Dan, you're in the company of Nancy?
Yes.
You don't need to hold it, she'll hold it for you. So you're in the company of Nancy?
Yes.
And you do know that you cannot be in any better company, do you not?
I travel a lot with her.
I would imagine that you know her well. Thank you for joining us today. And then Mike Obermeyer. Mike, where are you? Right here, sitting directly across from Jan. So Mike is also a guest of Nancy's been here one time. This is her second visit, and she's already brought out 2 new prospective attendees for us. Thank you. But anyhow, we have Mike Obermeyer here, and Mike is a United States Army veteran who served 1965 to 1968. He was artillery, and also I understand that you are a member of the Purple Heart Society, is that correct?
Yes, I am the commander of the Apache Junction chapter 2560.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also we have with us Al Tozer. Al, stand up here one second if you will. This is your first visit with us, and you're here as a guest of Jeff Coleman, right?
I am.
And Jeff lives right down the street from me. Do you live a distance from him? That's a good thing. If you want insight about this guy, call me. I'll be happy to share it with you.
I appreciate that.
Lock your doors at night. Hey, Jeff, this is your second visit back, right? It is. Thank you for coming back and joining us and bringing a neighbor.
Yeah.
So, what brought you to this meeting today other than Jeff's influence?
I worked as a defense contractor, so I was intrigued, compelled to come here. So that's where I
Thank you for your support, sir. We do appreciate that very much, so. Are you ready to get into a recruiting mode yourself?
work. Yes, sir.
You got a very, very good mentor there. He's brought you in after 1 week, so come again. Love to have you back. Thank you. So, one of our Marine Corps vets relayed a personal story to me here a while back about his experience while serving in Vietnam as a automatic rifleman on a reconnaissance fire team. And he said while walking along on patrol, this team was approaching a village about 1 click away when they spotted this huge hole in the ground. And the hole was about 5 foot square. And naturally, the team was curious about what the hole might be used for. Did it possibly contain weapon stash? Well, as they cautiously approached the hole, they were amazed by the size of the opening, and they were amazed by the fact that the hole was uncovered. So one of the team members said, "Man, that's some hole. I can't even see the bottom. I wonder how deep it is." Well, another team member said, "I don't know, but let's throw something down the hole and listen to see how long it takes to hit the bottom." Well, then the team leader spoke up and he said, "Hey, there's an old gearbox laying over there on the ground. Give me a hand and we'll throw it in and see how long it takes to hit the bottom." So 2 Marines pick up this gearbox and they lug it over to the hole and they count 1, 2, and 3 and they throw it in the hole. Well, they're standing there listening, looking over the edge. They hear a rustling in the brush behind them. And as they quickly turn around, weapons ready, they see a goat come crashing through the brush, run up to the hole, and jump in head first. So while they're standing there and looking at each other, then gazing back down the hole to figure out what that was all about, an old Vietnamese gentleman who lived in the nearby village walks up to the Marines very, very cautiously. And in broken English, the old man said, "Say there, you Marines didn't happen to see my goat around here anywhere, did you?" Team leader said, "You know, funny you should ask, but we were just standing here a minute ago and a goat came running out of the brushes doing about 100 miles an hour and jumped headfirst into this hole here." The old villager said, "Why, that's impossible. I had him chained to an old gearbox." So, folks, due to the claim of negligence on the part of the Marine reconnaissance team, it was reported that the loss of that one goat cost the United States $250 in compensatory damage claim submitted by that old villager. You know, as we reflect upon the United States Armed Forces, I'm sure you will agree that it's important that we familiarize ourselves with not only the present status of our military, but also historical military events, as well as propose plans for the future. Because lessons learned from history will influence both present and future objectives. You know, we as individuals learn from our successes and we learn from our mishaps, as do organizations, both large and small. That's why after action reviews are important in assessing what went right, what went wrong, and how we can improve upon similar scenarios that may present themselves in future activities or future missions. So this morning, I want you to accompany me on a journey, figuratively, of course. This will be a road trip with you as the chauffeur and me as the passenger. The journey will not be only physically exhausting, but dangerous, requiring you to push yourselves to the very limit of your physical and mental abilities. Are you ready to get on board? Well, I would say buckle up, but there are no seatbelts in these vehicles that you are about to board. This morning, we're going to reflect on that period of time following the D-Day landings of 6 June 1944, when more than 1 million Allied soldiers, consisting primarily of American, British, and Canadians, moved into France. 6 weeks following the landings, 25 July 1944, after finally breaking out of Normandy, Allied troops began advancing across the French countryside, sometimes covering as much ground as 80 miles per week. That's an average of 11 miles a day for an army consisting of 36 divisions to advance against heavily fortified German troops determined to protect the motherland. The challenges, obstacles, and resistance for the advancement were enormous. Following the Normandy landing, as the Allies were attempting to advance, the intense fighting along the hedgerows left the forces wedged in a relatively small area, about 50 miles wide, 20 miles deep. That's an area about half the size of Long Island. But on July 25, 1944, the 1st United States Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, broke through as part of Operation Cobra. Allied troops poured through the opening in German lines. They were soon joined by the U.S. Third Army under the direction of General George Patton, Old Blood and Guts, a nickname earned by his troops for his flamboyant speeches while he was leading the campaign in North Africa in 1942. As you might imagine, the Allies' advancement created a logistical challenge for commanders that are trying to supply this moving army across a country where many roads, bridges, and rail lines had been damaged or destroyed by U.S. paratroopers who were dropped in behind enemy lines prior to the Normandy landing. Additionally, German forces had destroyed many of the targets as well, fearing that if necessary for them to retreat to Germany, the Allies would have access to the roads and bridges and rail for their advancement. Those 36 Allied divisions needed constant resupply of beans, bullets, bandages, and POL. POL meaning petrol, oil, and lubricants. Think about this. During offensive operations, each Allied division consumed about 750 tons of supplies per day. Each of the 36. That's about 100 pounds per man, and the only way to deliver the supplies was by truck. Boatloads of supplies remained mostly dormant in Normandy. They were unable to be quickly directed to the front lines because of inadequate logistic resupply planning and the unexpected rapid advancement of Allied forces. The Allies were faced with the problem of delivering about 12,000 tons of supplies every day from the beaches and ports to the front lines. So, military commanders devised a solution they called the Red Ball Express. And almost overnight, the Red Ball Express was born and began its operations. The name Red Ball Express was derived from an old railroad term meaning to prioritize a shipment or a load. In fact, the convoy route system, Red Ball Express, was actually named after the red dots that were commonly used to identify priority express trains here in the United States, when the priority freight consisted of perishables or other types of items that needed expedition to its destination. Just stick a large red dot on the container or the rail car, and it was automatically designated as priority freight, with an upcharge, of course. Well, in order to expedite cargo shipments to the front lines, commanders ordered that convoy trucks would be emblazoned with an easily identifiable red ball insignia, and truck drivers were directed to follow similarly marked land route with red dot road signs along the route. That express highway was a specially designated highway that was closed to civilian traffic, open only to military vehicles. And the express didn't stop. It operated 24 hours a day. And over the next 82 days, the Red Ball Express delivered an estimated 12,000 tons of supplies daily, sometimes reaching up to 20,000 tons daily, allowing the Allied forces to advance without delay and eventually liberate France. That's 24 to 40 million pounds a day at its peak. And the Express was operating 6,000 vehicles. Now, as mentioned, prior to D-Day, the Allies had destroyed the French rail lines to prevent Germany from bringing up reinforcements in a counterattack. So now, U.S. military commanders realized the absolute desperate need for resupply, particularly gasoline, which was absolutely critical in order to keep the army moving across France. And again, the only way to supply the troops was by road. It was General Dwight Eisenhower who actually came up with the concept of the Red Ball Express. Ike then tapped Brigadier General Ewart Plank to be responsible for implementing the convoy system, using Army trucks in a nonstop loop to carry rations, gasoline, ammunition, and other vital supplies to troops at the front. And upon forming the Red Ball Express, General Plank, who was experienced in logistics and quite familiar with General George Patton's successes in battle, was quoted as saying, "Let it never be said that a lack of supplies stopped Patton when the Germans couldn't." So, after this brain trust of commanders huddled for 36 hours of logistics missions planning, they identified 132 already existing military trucking operations that were combined into a truck force composed primarily of 2.5-ton GMC Jimmys, 1.5-ton Dodge trucks, and 10-ton semi-trailers. The Dodge trucks had a reputation for reliability. I guess you could say today they were Ram tough. However, the GMC trucks were prone to breakdown. But Jimmys were available in greater numbers. Now, because of the extreme importance of speeding resupply to the advancing Allied forces, it was common for the wheeled vehicle mechanics to disable the engine governors on the convoy vehicles so they could travel faster than their 54 miles per hour of governed speed. Leave it to a gearhead and anything is possible. Well, to keep supplies flowing without delay, 2 routes were open. Those routes were from Cherbourg to the forward logistics base in Chartres. The northern route was used for delivering supplies, and the southern route for returning trucks. And the routes were selected to act as a continuous loop. Both the northern and the southern roads were closed to civilian traffic. Now, understand that at the very beginning of this particular mission, this operation, they were hugely traveling on unpaved dirt roads. It was only towards the latter part of the Red Ball Express mission that took 82 days, only towards the latter part that they actually started to employ the use of paved roads. So, on the return trips, empty 5-gallon fuel cans that were left along the roadside by the advancing forces, those gas cans were retrieved by convoy personnel and returned to be refilled. And to control traffic and provide security for the route, the 793rd Military Police Battalion was sent to the Red Ball, and they served from August through December 1944. MPs guarded the intersections to ensure that trucks did not have to stop for anything. Now, to avoid attracting the attention of enemy snipers and aircraft, truck headlights were not used. Now understand, these guys are operating 24/7. The drivers had to negotiate these old, dangerous dirt roads with only tiny blackout lights, commonly referred to as cat's eyes. These were mounted on the front of the vehicle, and typically one would be mounted on the rear. And these lights were designed primarily for identification, not illumination. But when the need for supplies became even more critical, forward commanders authorized the convoys to use headlights in areas further than 10 miles from the front lines. The convoy trucks also had priority on regular paved roads occupied by civilian traffic. And yes, convoys had Jeep escorts in front and behind with riflemen as drivers and co-drivers. Now, the most problematic natural enemy of the express was mud. And most of the expressway was indeed unpaved dirt roads during that first phase of the red ball operation. The trucks used 11 by 20-inch wheels that could be easily overwhelmed, and efforts to maneuver out of mud could burn out your transmissions. Additionally, dried mud could immobilize the truck's drum brakes. Mechanics were as busy as the truck drivers. Their attempt at keeping the vehicles rolling, however, was absolutely stellar. Then you had the vehicle recovery teams that were working around the clock. So as military supplies arrived at the French port of Cherbourg, they were loaded on the trucks, and the supplies were then transported to the Chartres area, and they were unloaded. Empty trucks then returned to Cherbourg to be loaded again. There was no rest for the weary. You know, it's interesting to note that thousands of military personnel received quick training to become truck drivers. Many of the drivers were pulled from the quartermaster corps. Most of the drivers were under 24 years of age. 75% of the personnel that were trained to drive the trucks had no previous experience driving heavy cargo trucks or any other type of motorized vehicle for that matter. The truckers often worked in two-man teams, and they would drive the 54-hour round-trip route from Cherbourg to Chartres and switch off drivers when one became too fatigued. Now, for reference, the map you see on screen follows today's toll road. That's a 7-hour round trip between the two cities, if you're driving at 80 miles an hour on a paved highway. So as you might expect, the three biggest problems facing the expressway were: one, finding and training enough drivers; two, vehicle maintenance problems; and three, a lack of sleep for the overworked truckers. Fatigue often resulted in vehicle accidents, further hindering the operation. Now, the original plan for the Red Ball Express called for trucks to drive at 25 miles per hour at 60-yard intervals in convoys escorted by Jeeps. But in reality, many trucks often travel along, leaving Cherbourg as soon as they were loaded and racing at speeds exceeding 60 miles an hour where possible to the forward supply depots despite blackout conditions. And if those problems weren't enough to deal with, military convoys were often a primary target of the German Luftwaffe. But in 1944, a German air power was so depleted that even convoys, which were quite tempting and typically quite easy targets, were rarely attacked. Most of the attacks on the convoys came from sniper fire, small infantry units, and landmines. Troops were constantly sweeping the routes for landmines. All along the Red Ball Highway, the truckers passed grim sights of war. Wrecked German tanks and trucks pushed to the side. They saw the graves of fallen enemy soldiers, and dead and decaying livestock everywhere. Destroyed bridges had to be bypassed, and when the convoys came to hamlets along the routes, they had to slow to a crawl. The drivers of heavily loaded 10-ton tractor trailers had to summon all of their skill to maneuver through those narrow village streets. And even the smaller 2.5-ton Jimmy trucks hauling the little 1-ton trailers found it hard going. One of those drivers was Private James Bazemore. Bazemore was 19 when he enlisted in the United States Army. He was assigned to the 3717 Quartermaster Truck Company and drove a truck on the Red Ball Express. After the war's end, James was interviewed about his military experience and was quoted as saying, "We didn't think about what we were doing much because it was our job." He went on to say, "We carried gasoline and all kinds of supplies and even hauled bodies back to take to the Normandy American Cemetery, about 50 miles from Charleroi." Then there was Private Austin Howley. Howley served in the 3902 Quartermaster Company. Austin Howley was a rifleman, a truck driver in the Red Ball Express. In an interview before his death in 2017, he recalled the bumpy, narrow roads, having to dodge landmines, sniper fire, and aerial bombardment. He said, "We'd drive and be fired upon at the same time. Those bullets whizzing by are still ringing in my ears." There were many of those stories from soldiers like Private Bazemore and Howard. Now, would you believe that at the height of the Red Ball Express operation, those nearly 6,000 trucks were transporting supplies across France, 6,000 trucks. At any given time during the operation, an average of 900 vehicles were on the road. And the Express remained open for 82 days until 13 November 1944, when enough French rail lines had been repaired and the port facilities at Antwerp, Belgium, was reopened, alleviating the need for the Red Ball Express highway. Soon after the port of Antwerp opened, the drivers of the Red Ball Express returned to their respective units. Most of them came from Quartermaster Corps. However, their accomplishments were well publicized by the Army and even served as the basis for a 1952 movie of the same name. In after-action reviews of the Red Ball operation, military commanders agreed that Allies could not have reached Germany without the Express. In fact, the Red Ball Express was so successful that several other similar convoy systems were established throughout France when the need arose. Lessons learned from the Red Balls strongly contributed to the successes of those similar convoy systems, allowing those allies to advance with minimal resupply issues. So, how did you enjoy the journey as my chauffeur today? exhausted from the road trip. You know, we really experienced some truly rough and winding roads along those hazardous paths this morning. Time magazine called the Red Ball Express part of the miracle of supply that sustained American forces thousands of miles from North America. Time magazine went on to declare that, quote, this miracle was the American tradition, a tradition that Germans have never really understood. It was begotten of a people accustomed to great spaces, to transcontinental railways, to nationwide trucking chains, to endless roads and millions of automobiles. Indeed, the United States Army was the most mechanized military in the world in 1944. But the Red Ball Express also succeeded because of the devotion to duty of thousands of men who were committed to doing their part to win the war. This is yet another phenomenal story of United States exceptionalism and the admirable ability of our warriors to improvise, adapt, and overcome any type of adversity. I mentioned earlier that General Eisenhower is credited with the larger concept of the Red Ball Express and its routing. Of note is that it would later be President Eisenhower who influenced the development of the United States interstate highway system in the 1950s. The Dwight D. Eisenhower system of interstate and defense highways was launched on June 29, 1956, when President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. The act authorized $25 billion for the construction of the network from 1957 to 1969 and expanded the system to 41,000 miles. Eisenhower had as his primary motivation for the United States interstate system was defense, as a way to evacuate cities in the event of an atomic attack. Remember those days? The system was also intended to address the growing number of cars on the nation's highways and to serve traffic traveling between the states. So, from that extraordinary military initiative of 1944 with a mission to swiftly and securely route massive volumes of supplies to an advancing Allied force on foreign soil, was born an extraordinary government initiative to swiftly and securely route massive volumes of private-owned vehicles and supplies across country on U.S. soil. May I have a hoo-ah for those determined warriors involved with the Red Ball Express? Hoo-ah! Thank you, thank you. And you know something? It's rather interesting that Jan Snyder served as a trucker of the 5-ton vehicle.
Petroleum hauler.
Hauling petroleum. So you can certainly relate to this message today, right?
Yeah.
Folks, thank you so very much for your attentiveness today and your attendance. I do have a couple of announcements I would like to make. Recently, we announced our plan to again, participate in this year's East Valley Veterans Day Parade. And we requested volunteers to represent our Red Friday Patriots group in that parade. We've already created a list of volunteers today, but we're still open for more of you folks to join us. We'd really like to have a strong representation of Red Friday members for that event. So, please, send me a text, email, reach out to me by phone if you would be available to participate. And by the way, we plan to have 2 vehicles in the parade this year. So if you prefer to ride as opposed to walk that 3/4 mile parade route, that'll be okay as well. And again, we want to send a shout out to those of you that are previewing this meeting on our YouTube site. Thanks for joining us. Please share the link with family, friends, and especially those folks who have loved ones currently deployed. Also, as a final reminder, please drop off your name badges at the greeting table as you leave the hall. And to our first-time guests who have joined us today, thank you for joining us. I sincerely hope that you will come back and join us again, sharing our camaraderie and our support for our American warriors. And to all of you, let's not discount the importance of this mission to remember everyone deployed. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.